for good energy, for healing energy, and for connection with ancestor and spirit and Kisimanto. I hope everybody's having a beautiful day. It's a beautiful sunny day here in Treaty 1, Winnipeg, Sis, place where the creator sits. It's really honored to be here on such a heartfelt occasion, especially for our Two-Spirit and Indigenous queer relatives. I think this hits our community harder than anybody thinks or wants to see or believe. Are we doing our introductions now, Percy?
I wanted to do a sound check.
Oh, we're just doing a little sound check. Okay.
So if you can pass it off to Sarah, Corrina, or Monica.
Okay, Sarah, you ready? Okay, I'm gonna mute myself.
Kasla. You can hear me? Beautiful. I'll pass it to Corrina.
Hey everybody, how's it going? Test, 1, 2, 3. Hear me all right? Super excited. Percy, you're gonna make me cry. Sheesh, I haven't even started yet and I'm already getting lumpy. I better get some tissues. But yeah, I can hear everybody.
Monica, are you able to unmute? Turn on your mic? For someone who's disabled, I keep using ableist language. Oh. I think our relative felt that it was best for them to log out and they're going to try logging back in. So for those of you on the panel, I appreciate your patience. I'm glad I had a double smudge. Oh, there we go. There's our relative. Monica.
Yeah, sorry guys, my volume wasn't working.
You're here, limb lumped. Okay. I just want to, we were able to check everybody's mics. The microphones are working, limb lump, and I'll know as the moderator to know just to give some time. I know it's not always my greatest asset because the grandparents and the life givers and the caregivers gave me the name Salalat, which means a little time. I have to take a little time to make decisions and all those things because I could walk before I could run or crawl or sit. So that's my life. And so I will really espouse my name. Visually for the folks, you have joined us today for the 2nd of 8. Yes, there's 4 more in the winter season for a very important conversation and circle and sharings from Brielle, Sarah, Corrina, and Monica about this day being the National Action and Awareness for 2SLGBTQQIA relatives and kin, also for Indigenous assigned female at birth and little people, meaning children. And it's sponsored by Laurier. So yes, okay. So I'm gonna, in the spirit of transparency and holding space, we have relatives and kin who have this shared intersectional identities as we do, and the content that we're going to be speaking about this evening. And in some cases, to my relatives in the South Pacific, it's morning. So good morning to you, Sandy, and Macquarie University Indigenous Studies program. We also have folks from the Indigenous Illuminati group here, York and Laurentian, Lim Lump to you folks too, and folks who continue to hold me up as folks who I don't believe that I'm actually mentoring them, that they're actually showing me a way that there's another future possible. Noe and Don Marie and Kai, some of the folks here. But for folks who need to see information, someone will copy these and put these in a Q&A because I've taken away the chat function. I don't want to get distracted. by what happens in this chat and have people hijack it and try to deter it away from the importance of what today is about and what we're going to bring to the circle and share with you so generously, folks in attendance. So there's a final report. It's a starting point and starting conversation of a council of two-spirit folks were able to come together. But that's not without recognizing that we did not come to this place on our own, that we were on the shoulders of those who have gone before us. And one of those people is here, Sarah Hunt, and Monica Forrester, and Brielle, Beardy, Linklater. And I also want to share important work of For Us, By Us, by a settler in terms of consensual solidarity through Red Women Rising, where they actually highlighted and centered the experiences of two-spirit, gender diverse folks in their experiences of the Indigenous women in downtown's East Side. That's a document there. And as stuff may come up and as stuff, having your reality and your experiences reflected back in you by the people who are speaking and some of the stories that people might share and some of the action items people want to have, you may have wanted to share them before, you may have wanted to hear them before, and you may have wanted to say them before. We're creating that opportunity to speak with you, my relatives and kin, and that I want to be accountable and transparent as a helper, as kin squeezed scalo, to provide opportunities for people to reach out. Indigenous folks here, Black folks here, because I don't want to be remiss in saying that Black folks do not experience parallel examples of systemic violence against them, their personhood, their communities, their families here as arrivants. So there are places people can reach out to and my due diligence, because again, as the chair of the Indigenous Studies program at Wilfrid Laurier University, it's important to provide resources for students who are here, and there are some folks who are here wanting to expand their basket of knowledge of how to reduce the harm when it comes into contact with folks who have experienced gender-based violence and are Indigiqueer and gender diverse. So now that I got that out of the way, for those who need to see what's going on, visually make sense and process, we're gonna have an opening. I'm gonna introduce the panelists and they're gonna share with you what they would like to leave you with. I'll do a little bit about me, and then we'll engage in a conversation about missing and murdered 2SLGBT relatives and kin, and a small opportunity for Q&A, because I think us having access to this people might take up the whole time. And then in closing, as we come together, we need to create an opportunity for a closing. So I would like to leave it to my relatives, I'm moderating, who feels moved to share with us and to bring us together in a good way to open. Okay, I will mute myself, Brielle.
Kente, everybody. Hope everybody's having a beautiful day. Dante Brown, need to see the question, wape kihui squel, need to see the question, komina, wape makes you swado, need to see the question, Nisatar Signi the Oti, komina, Winnipeg, need to see I am. Hi, my name is Brielle Linklater. I am Red Strong Eagle Woman and White Eagle Tail. Those are the names that were given to me by Spirit. From the Nisitawai Cree Nation. I come from the Rocky Cree people, and I am of the Lynx clan. And I live here in Treaty 1 territory in Winnipeg, also known as the place where the Creator sits. Such a beautiful day today, and I was thinking about like how I was going into this not actually absorbing anything from my cis hetero relatives because I couldn't log into Facebook and Instagram earlier. I was like, wow, this day truly is queer, and Creator wanted it this way, I suppose, so that we could put our medicines out there in our most authentic way. I don't think about that sometimes. Sometimes I sometimes I just doom scroll Facebook and Instagram before I do these events, and I think about what am I gonna say? What's on everybody's minds? Now I'm like, okay, now that process is eliminated, because that's my normal prep for myself, is get mentally prepped to see what other people in my community are doing and try to work off of the energies of the collective. But I guess I'm just here on my own with ancestors and creators. So I guess that's the vibe that I need to be getting in tune with. But I'm really grateful to be here with my fellow panelists. Percy, it's wonderful to be in space with you again. Thank you for always being a critical, kind relative, because you know how to curate and bring a group of people together like nobody else's business. Privileged to be able to do this work with you, alongside you, to have ancestors rekindling with joy in the spirit world because of our collective gathering here as Two-Spirit and Indigenous queer peoples. I think what we hold collectively is so beautiful, and I think what we're doing to honor our relatives, to honor our missing, murdered relatives, we're really focusing on that ancestral connection, on revitalizing that connection with spirit, and reclaiming sacred kinship through our practices, through our pedagogies, and through just being who we are as a people. So I just need to see Percy's face again. So am I going all in? Am I all going all in with the introduction part? Okay. So I'm gonna look at my questions really fast. So it says, who am I? So my name is Brielle, Beardy Linklater, for those of you who haven't already heard my name. I'm also nervous. I just want to get this over with. That's kind of why I was like, I'll go first. That way I can get my nerves over with. But I come from the Rocky Cree territory. We call it Asiniskau-Dinawakaske, the land of the Asiniskau, rocky, abundant country of rocks, or something like that. Also reclaiming my language, I think it's important to set context to, as a millennial too. I'm somebody reclaiming rites and passages, as well as language and ceremonial knowledge as well. And I think there's such a need for young people to connect with culture, as well as our Two-Spirit and indigenous queer communities. So to be on this path, for me, it's about like the roles and responsibility, ultimately about like keeping this knowledge, keeping it good, walking in balance with our creator and with our earth, being in balance with creation ultimately too. So within I'll share a little bit about my Cree background and my Cree history. So I come from two different tribes. I come from the Rocky Cree tribes who live around the Mississippi River, the Big River, also known as Churchill River, northern Manitoba. My people have historically always been there. And also on my dad's side, I come from the Swampy Cree, the Musquem, Swampy Cree, who's occupied the traditional territories of the coast of the Hudson Bay for thousands and thousands of years. So my people's lineage can be traced to all across Kwakwaka'wakw, which is the land of the north in northern Manitoba. So a lot of my teachings come from there. My walks of life have come through there. My ancestors that have come before me have come from there. So my context is I'm a descendant of fur traders in Manitoba. A lot of my activism and what I do now stems directly from the conditions and disparity of my homeland. Since the arrival of Musquem, which we call people who arrive by wooden boats, we call white people Musquem. It also sets a context too, because my people use that word because that's where they came from. They came through our land, through the waters, touching the Hudson Bay. You know, it's the only inland large lake. I think it's almost an ocean, Hudson Bay. But anyways, my people had contacts through Churchill and through York factories, and this relationship would forever alter the way that Nihilawak and Ninilawak peoples would live in northern Manitoba. So with that settler contact came things like transphobia, erasures, transgender and gender nonconforming peoples within our northern tribes. Also welcomed an unhealthy amount of violence towards our trans and LGBTQ members living within our tribes. And then I guess that in that same timeline too, our two spirits were negatively impacted by the process of indoctrination, I should say, through the residential schools, through the forced use of churches, through the use of only binary languages and understandings in our community. We were forced out of it. So from that time until now, to our present day, a lot has been done by our two-spirit and Indiqueer relatives. So it is my understanding that I have, as a young trans woman, as a Nihidua gu'ł, that I have the job to continue this to this journey as a link, connecting present to past, present to future, making sure that as I'm here, that I'm keeping in mind all the relatives that I walk with and the responsibilities we share collectively, to see our brilliance and the success of our two-spirit people today is something that I've been pushing for. But I also have to remember the hardships and the struggles that were overcame by those who came before me. So I've always taken upon myself to honor ancestors. So it is through the work of ceremony and through Wakotuen, which is everything is connected. It's the Cree philosophy that everything on this cosmic plane, physical plane, in all four directions, we're all connected. And as two-spirit people, we move freely through these planes and these in a different way. We exist in more ways than one. And then in ceremony, it's the way that we bring our people together to remind them the roles and responsibilities, because for us as two-spirit people, we're so close to creation. We ungender creation because creation was ungendered, because creator created man and woman, but there's also more that was created. And I guess it's our time to be able to share these stories and have the rights to tell these stories. We have the rights to queer our creation stories, to queer the narratives of our creation stories. I always was taught that our Cree pedagogies were Christianized, and that even though that they were Christianized, there was still some truth in it. And years later, that these two-spirit people would come along and they would take what they could from these stories and ungender them and breathe life back into our stories and into our nations. So that's what I believe. So as a young woman, as I spent quite a lot of time going into different ceremonial spaces, challenging the narratives of should I be on the men's side? Should I be on the women's side? Do I wear a ribbon skirt or not? And I thought, I don't want this to be my only struggle, because as a trans woman, as a two-spirit woman, there's so much more than just what I put on my body or where I sit. There's more to the struggle than that. Our two-spirit relatives struggle every single day to fight for themselves, to be able to justify their respect, their humanity, to have those things, to have their dignity. And in the front lines of MMIW, 2SLGBTQ, we've had to insert our voices and our concerns as a sister who has sisters in the spirit world. I have a lot of trans relatives who've passed on, who are homeless, who suffered through addictions, through poverty, through surviving through sex trade. And it's my hope that I can keep those sisters in my prayers and my thoughts and remember them in this work, because it is only through remembering where we came from, remembering who our family is, remembering who our kin is, we're going to be able to all make it through this together. We got to hold each other strong, and we also have to remember the prayers, and we have to remember that even though this is a hard path, we still at the end of the day are deserving of love and life. Even though this road, this lifestyle, whatever you want to call it, this life of being Indiqueer and two-spirit is really hard sometimes, but we have to remember that we are loved, we are deserving of love. We can exude kindness, but we can also be other things too. We can also be strong, we can also be resilient, but we're human above all, and we follow human laws given to us by our creator. And within my nation, it is the two-spirit people that remind people of their roles. So in my language, we call people idhino, and in multiple peoples, idhinowak. So one person is idhino, and then a full person is idhinowak. So we have these laws called idhinisuin, which is our humility laws of human. And we carry those teachings because we are most sacred amongst our tribes, living in our tribes. We carry a lot of lessons. We carry a lot of medicines that both men and women collectively can use. We have a purpose, and we have every right to be where our cisgender brothers and sisters put themselves. If they can be in spaces, so can we. I've always been a believer of queering the narrative, of taking your space, but I've learned to understand that, there's a certain level of violence that comes with standing our ground, with unapologetically taking up space. And we need to remember prayers, we remember honoring ourselves, and we remember being a link to the ancestors to come and the ancestors that have already came. We have to remember that we can't allow other people to dim what our role is here, because it's between us and the creator how we're going to live this life, and it's not up to anybody else to tell us how we're going to do that. So we have to do this in a good way. And that's kind of been the journey for me. As I've lived in northern Manitoba, I was part of the few people who started the first Pride celebration in northern Manitoba. We started Pride North of 55. And for me, that was like the first first time doing anything relative to the LGBTQ community. I'm also like nervous, not drinking water, so I gotta slow down and remember to breathe, because I'm part air, and my nerves are a lot up. So thank you for like bearing with me as I'm saying a lot. I'm really passionate about our two-spirit community. So I was saying, we created a pride organization in northern Manitoba called Pride North of 55, and that was the first time I really thought of like my gender identity, my gender expression, and sexuality as like a part of like any kind of human rights force. So that was the first time I ever came into that type of context and work. So it was from there about creating spaces where my relatives could be their authentic selves, grieve authentically, and play a role in taking back like the narrative for queer and two-spirit and trans rights in northern Manitoba. It was from there that I started working with the government to create policy change for trans people accessing like medical transition. So you could only come to Manitoba, the only place prior to 2016, you could only go to Winnipeg to get this. In northern Manitoba, you couldn't get it anywhere. So because of the work that I did and the work of so many other trans people in Manitoba, we got like coverage everywhere in Manitoba. So there's doctors and nurses who are being trained to be able to like provide a hormone replacement therapy. And then I went on to be the first trans woman that sat in Canadian Parliament in 2017 when I did Daughters of the Vote. That was a really historic moment for myself and for other trans people looking to occupy electoral positions. I don't actually personally believe I want to do that kind of thing again. That was a lot. It was too much. It was great. At the same time, it came with a lot of weight and pressure. I think as a lonely trans woman, I think I feel more empowered being in spaces with my sisters and ceremony. I enjoy my role as an auntie. I enjoy like being a part of a collective, and that's where my personal power is. It's being within my community. It's being a grassroots organizer. So now what I do as a modern day, what I do now is I support calls to actions that support land, water, people, for sovereignty. I support many voices here in the city. I amplify the voices of our youth. I amplify the voices of our women. I've always been a part of MMIWG 2S causes. I was invited to speak in the two-spirit dialogues that they were having with the National Inquiry into MMIWG. That's when it was just MMIWG, not MMIWG2S. So that was back in 2018. A bunch of Two-Spirit relatives and myself were invited to speak, to be able to advocate for what we wanted to see from this inquiry. And it was kind of a tokenistic process that kind of left most of us burnt out more than anything. But that work now has led me to be a peacekeeper for my people, but also to be a helper and, you know, through grieving work. So I've done the T-Door celebrations, which was kind of hard, because as a trans woman, it was kind of expected that somebody in the community would organize these vigils with nobody, like, you know, with my members of, like, let's say the white queer community not really considering the depths of grievances that Indigenous people have. So for me, I've been organizing T-Door since 2015, off and on. And since that time, it's kind of grown like my angsty spirit. Like it's fueled me in ways that I didn't want to be fueled. I didn't want to be fueled by the rage of my trans kin's death. I think that's really hard on all of us. So it's taught me to develop a toolkit for myself to be able to do this work, so I can honor spirit, so I can honor those loved ones of ours that have gone on. And I pray that other people have supports and strengths in this kind of work, in this field that we do, advocating for our missing and murdered loved ones. I don't know how much space I've taken up, but I'm gonna hand it back to Percy.
Okay. Just to help with direction, I kind of put it in this slide, and if you can see it on your device, hopefully you can. But what I had sent out is, who are you? Who are your people? Who claims you? What are your roles and responsibilities? Those things that you feel comfortable with. And why do we as Indigenous, Afro-Indigenous, Black Indigenous folks introduce ourselves in this way? And what are the responsibilities in doing that? So I'll turn it over to Monica at this time.
Annie, bonjour, hello. Hi, I'm Monica Forrester. I am Indigenous and Black descent. I'm from Curve Lake, Ontario. I'm a two-spirited queer trans woman. My spirit name is Southern Eagle, which was given to me by my elder. And I'm a little nervous. Very good speaking, Brielle. That was really great. I was like, wow. Okay. Who are my people? Anishinaabe people from my Curve Lake, Ontario. And also my African Black roots from, well, I'll go back from Nova Scotia, but go further back from the Caribbean. I'm a 60s group survivor, so I was in foster care from a baby till I was 10 years old. So reclaiming my heritage, you know, in my early teens, when I got out of foster care and started going to Wandering Spirits of the First Nation, which was very instrumental in, you know, reclaiming who I was. Fern Harper and Pauline Harper were the elders of the school at the time. It was really hard for me growing up, knowing that I was mixed race, but also being brought up by white people. I lost a lot of my culture and heritage. So I struggled with my identity, you know, and being a mixed race person, you know, I felt very kind of, you know, alienated from the Indigenous community, alienated from the Black community. I was never Black enough, I was never Indigenous enough, you know, and created a lot of, and then being two-spirit, I think growing up, my mom and my elders would always say I was special, you know what I mean? But it just, at that time, it was so hard, because I think being two-spirited in the 70s and 80s, you know, we didn't talk about it. It wasn't something we talked about. You know what I mean? And so I had to put on these kind of roles that didn't fit who I was. You know, growing up, I was very suicidal. I didn't understand. I prayed to the Creator to change me, and why was I this kind of person? And I think colonialism really played a role in how I got those responses from my mom and from my relatives, because, you know, they were kind of ashamed to really talk about it. You know, my mom was more, you know, endearing about it. She would say it was special, but, you know, it was hard. It was just hard. I wanted to be different, you know. So I left home at a very early age at 15 and found myself in downtown Toronto, you know, downtown Toronto with the, you know, and found a large two-spirited community that was also homeless, that were coming from different areas of Turtle Island, like, you know, from the East Coast to West Coast, you know, and we all had the same stories, that we were leaving home because of the stigma and discrimination that we were experiencing of being trans or two-spirited, and looking for a better life, you know, looking for acceptance and hoping that Toronto would give us that acceptance. You know, but it wasn't that reality. You know, in the 80s, the late 80s and 90s, two-spirited people were criminalized and policed by police. You know, we had the highest rate of HIV and AIDS. You know, a lot of my friends are passed on very prematurely because of the stigma they faced through services they accessed, healthcare, and even within our communities. Our communities at that time weren't really acknowledging, you know, two-spirited queer folks, and you know what I mean, and just didn't know how to address that. And I think, well, I don't think, I know that colonization has really played a role in the mistreatment of two-spirited people, and you know, and the education and the history that goes along with that, you know. And I'm glad we're in a place today where we can reclaim that history. You know, it's slow, it's happening, you know what I mean, but we're reclaiming spaces, and like Brielle said, we're making space. You know, it's important that we make space in these circles to show representation. You know what I mean? Our creators created us this way for a reason, you know, and so a lot of one of my roles and responsibilities is bringing visibility, bringing awareness, bringing a voice. You know what I mean? To, you know, and it hasn't been an easy role. I also come from a very marginalized, racialized community that was in the sex industry. You know what I mean? We were pushed into these areas of work, you know what I mean, because of survival, because of circumstance, you know, and that's something, you know, that we don't talk about within our communities, because, you know, even sex was kind of, through colonization, was erased from our, you know, that we shouldn't talk about our sexuality and our sex, and, you know, and then have a layer of sex work on top of that. You know, our communities just don't want to engage in those conversations. So I've been very, you know, for the last 20 years working to bring more visibility and awareness and acceptance around all people in our community, regardless of our circumstance, regardless of the work that we do. You know what I mean? That we need to be supporting all identified women in our communities. You know what I mean? We're not whole if we're leaving one particular group of women, you know, apart from the rest of the women. You know, we can't keep us all safe if we're not keeping everyone safe. You know, and that's something, you know, on this day, Sister in Spirits, which I'm very vocal about, to talk about all those lives that have been lost, but also to recognize those two-spirited, you know, women, trans women, sex workers, because they were people in our communities. They had families and children and mothers and fathers that loved them, you know, and we have to recognize that, and we have to, you know what I mean? We need to work together as a community to better the outcomes for all of us. You know what I mean? Regardless of what we do in our lives, we're still very visible out there in society. We're still very vulnerable. You know what I mean? We have the most highest rates of violence and deaths. You know what I mean? So that is something that I really bring awareness to. You know, I've been running for almost 15 years the Indigenous sex work drum group, which allows a space for Indigenous workers to actually feel that they can still be a part of community and practice their culture, you know what I mean, without shame, without judgment, you know. And we've actually really made a lot of inroads with a lot of agencies like Native Women's Resource Center, Two Spirits of the First Nation, and so many more to really recognize that, you know what I mean, we are people. You know what I mean? We need our communities, and we need, you know, people just to understand that, you know what I mean, regardless, like I said, of our circumstance, you know what I mean? We are here, and we, you know, and we demand the same human rights and equality like everyone else in our communities. So my role is, you know, to bring awareness, and, you know, that comes with, you know, I've lost a lot of people through this, you know, about being open about my sex work. I traveled to the East Coast, West Coast, you know what I mean, through my younger years, you know what I mean, and met so many, you know, two-spirited women, queer women, and two-spirited trans women and men. You know, we also have to recognize there's a large, you know, two-spirited men's population that are overlooked and deal with the same sort of stigma and violence, right? So when we, you know, we can go more into it. So that's my responsibility, is to be here to show more, you know, awareness of, you know, mixed Indigenous people in our communities, sex workers, trans, two-spirited, non-binary folks, and men. Thank you.
I would like to invite Sarah to introduce yourself, and you as prompters, who are you, who are your people, who claims you, what are some of your responsibilities, and the importance of introducing ourselves this way.
Gila Kasla, thank you so much. Thank you, Percy, for the invitation to be in this conversation today. It's just such an honor. Anytime we can gather together with these wonderful speakers, I'm just so, Monica, I haven't seen you in years, but yeah, I wish we were in person, but for now, this is a beautiful space to be online. So thank you for the invitation. So who am I? I'm Sarah Hunt. My Kwakwala name is Tlali Tila Ogwa, which means someone who goes around inviting people. And so for me, that in terms of thinking about my role and responsibility, I think that, you know, my name, to me, I'm often really thinking about what it means to be someone who fosters relationships, who invites people in, the ability to work across, you know, different community spaces and contexts, and to be, you know, kind of mobile across those spaces. And that's how I've sort of come to think about what it means to be me, to have the name that I carry first and foremost before any of the other roles that I take on in different contexts. So I'm Kwagiulth through my grandfather. I'm also Zawadenoch, both of which are part of the Kwakwaka'wakw people from the northern part of what's now called Vancouver Island here on the coast, and also Tlingit from Alaska. And then I'm also Ukrainian through my mom's side. And I grew up here in the Kwangin territories on the Songhees Reserve as a young person growing up here as a guest. And I am currently a professor, but before that, I came to these issues as a young person, involved in grassroots kind of organizing, doing anti-violence work, starting kind of in my teen years, and you know, still carry the kind of role of a professor reluctantly and often unsure about that. But you know, first and foremost, I think that the kind of grassroots and community work I do, and work as a relative, as a queer femme, I'm still figuring out my relationship to the word two-spirit. I think that's always, you know, something I'm always thinking about. But most of the work that I do in relation to violence, in relation to our murdered and missing relatives, is as a relation, as a community member, more so than any kind of formal role that I have now. So to me, my responsibilities are, you know, really to be always asking who's at the table, like whose voice is being centered, to think about when I can step back so that other important voices can come forward. Yeah, that's why I'm really just so delighted to be with all of you today. It's so rare to have these spaces where Two-Spirit and Indiqueer and trans, gender diverse people, where we can actually come together and talk to each other about these things. So it's such a gift. I also wanted to say, in terms of thinking about these questions, so we in Kwakwala, we don't have any words for, we don't refer to people as he or she. We refer to others in terms of whether they're near or far, and whether they're in view or out of view. And learning that has really helped me to think about our relations who passed on or who've been taken from us too soon, because I think about my responsibility to those who are still close, but we can't see them anymore, really drives kind of how I think about my responsibilities. So, and also how I think about myself and getting beyond the gender binary and the English language, to think about my name and the inherent responsibilities that come with that, but also the rights that each of us are born with as we come into relation, into this world in our families and our nations. And that there's still so much work to do, especially when we think about anti-violence work and MMIWG, as that sort of framing was formed, it kind of cut off the realities of gender diversity and the rights that we all inherently carry, regardless of our gender, and also because of the gender expression that we have. So there's lots to talk about, but I think that's all for me. Thank you.
I'd like to invite Corrina to introduce yourself, and as prompt is, who are you? Who are your people? Who claims you? What, if you, as you feel comfortable, some roles and responsibilities, and why it's important for us to introduce ourselves in this way.
Hi, Percy. See na see ya. Corrina Sparrow kunasquih talitsan Musquem I puntlats I duts. See talits and queth lamps. Thank you so much, Percy, for bringing us all together in this circle. I was super excited to learn that you were doing this series, and I felt the jitters as well before the meeting, but I don't think it was nervousness. I think now that I'm actually sitting in the circle, it's because when those of us that are Two-Spirit or identify as Indiqueer come together like this to have conversations with each other, and that dialogue and that experience is centralized in this way, it's very powerful, super magic. And I can feel it. I can feel the vibrations, even though we're through a Zoom meeting right now. I'm super stoked to be sitting here and invited to share a little bit of my experience with my esteemed relatives and colleagues that are here as well. So my heart is super grateful, Percy, for you taking initiative to bring us together. And I'm super grateful to my relatives here for everything that you're going to share and your generosity in that. My name is Corrina Sparrow. I'm from the Musquem Nation and the Qualicium Nation of the Potlatch people. Qualicium is over on what is now called Vancouver Island, and I am coming to you or speaking to you from the shared territories of the Musquem, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people, which is also known as East Van in Vancouver. So yeah, I'm in Vancouver technically, but so those are my people. I also have some Dutch ancestry on my dad's side as well. Who am I? That's such a huge question. I was born and raised off reserve. I was raised in Nuu-chah-nulth territory, in Sayot Nation territory, actually, which is an area in Port Alberni on Vancouver Island. And when I became a young adult, I moved over to Songhees territory in Victoria, where I stayed for about 15 years. I've been an Indigenous social worker, Indigenous social work manager, and educator for the past 20 years in lots of different capacities and roles and responsibilities that go along with that. So I would say that who claims me, I mean, other than my families and my circle of loved ones, who claims me as a helper, I would say would be the families and the communities that I have had the honor and privilege to work with and alongside throughout that time. There's been many teachers, many mentors, that I've had the privilege and honor to to learn beside, to learn from, and to carry me forward as an Indigenous Two-Spirit helper, you know, in that work. Started off really young as a cultural programs coordinator, actually, and a youth support worker at the local Victoria Native Friendship Center. Because I was raised off reserve, I really connected with the Indigenous urban circles, right? Urban communities, and the friendship centers played a large role in bringing me home, I guess, to Indigenous community and ways of knowing and being in that sense. When I moved to Victoria, I was, like some of my relatives here are talking about, was leaving the small town that I was raised in to go to a bigger city, seeking out queer community, right? Indiqueer community, because it was not very accepted or was not very welcomed in the town that I was raised in. So coming to Victoria, that's what I was looking for, and started to get involved with local queer organizations, AIDS Vancouver Island, and that was in Victoria. But I quickly realized that those settler queer organizations also did not fully recognize at all the fact that I was Indigenous, that there are Indigenous queer folks, and they didn't know how to incorporate those realities or ways of knowing and being into the programs and support services that they were offering queer community members. So that's, I've just heard somebody else talking about that as well, that growing up, I mean, my experience as a Two-Spirit person was often very split, right? Like I'm either queer or I'm either Indigenous, and there were very few opportunities for those two realities in my identity and experience to come together. So that's something that I've always held very close to my heart, always been looking for that sense of home, that sense of a queer community in that way. So I guess in that way, I mean, my exploration or my research, you know, into Two-Spirit or queer community started when I was born, when I was a young person, informally, just always looking for family, looking for community, not really finding it. And then going back to post-secondary school as a mature student, sort of understanding and making a link between the impacts of settler colonialism and cultural genocide, and how that has resulted in this fracturing that I had experienced as a young person, which I'm hearing that a lot of us have experienced that as well. So I always knew that I wanted to research Two-Spirit community and Two-Spirit knowledges. And so when I went back to do my master's degree, I think that was back in 2017, I knew that I wanted to centralize looking at Coast Salish Two-Spirit identities and experiences, because another thing that I found is all the Two-Spirit information and knowledge that was out there was really based in our relative cultures and ceremonies that are in the East, here in what's known as Canada, right? Or South Pacific or Native American traditions, but there wasn't anything that was reflecting back West Coast knowledges, some of our West Coast cultural ways, you know, ceremonies, ways of knowing and being. And it's really important for us as Two-Spirit people, Two-Spirit Indiqueer people, to see ourselves being reflected back, right? Like in the knowledge, in the programs, in the community circles that we are traveling within. So I knew I wanted to centralize land-based, culturally specific Two-Spirit knowledge gathering and story gathering. So that's what the master's research was about. And I did that alongside our Coast Salish community, intergenerational community members as well. So I went into our communities and asked them first, is this something that's of interest to them? And then once they agreed, we all kind of decided collaboratively what that knowledge gathering, story gathering was going to look like, and kind of went from there. So I would consider myself a baby in that way, in terms of kind of entering into this Two-Spirit movement circle formally, really recently, right? Like it was 2017, I actually started to look into it, even though I think all of us as Two-Spirit folk carry all of this knowledge and this experience and have a lot to offer in terms of helping our more, helping our Two-Spirit Indiqueer relatives, but also our cis and heteronormative relatives as well, understand what it's like, you know, to be a Two-Spirit person, and what we need to come home to culture, to family and community throughout our lives. So I am a baby that way, but as a result of the research that we did in Coast Salish nations here in Vancouver and on Vancouver Island, I was one of the co-founders for the Coast Salish Two-Spirit Pride Collective, and started through my work with the Musquem Nation. I came back home maybe 7 or 8 years ago to run the social development department in Musquem. And so I started to do some Two-Spirit and Indiqueer programming there because there was nothing happening within community. And because I was the social worker in community, I had the opportunity to hear from a lot of our families, a lot of our relatives, mostly our young people, our youth, saying that they are queer, that they identify as Two-Spirit, and they didn't know why that identity and experience wasn't being centralized in the programs, if that makes sense. So the Coast Salish Two-Spirit Collective was a big part of that work. We started as Musquem, engaging in a lot of the local pride activities that are happening here, right? Like the Pride Parade and like out on film, out in schools, and all the different kind of settler white queer programming, just sort of partnering up with them and getting the community more accustomed to being more inclusive of our Two-Spirit and Indiqueer relatives within the community, not just in the urban circles. And in 2020, I ended up getting elected as the co-chair and the BC representative for the first National Two-Spirits in Motion Society. So that was really exciting, and it was really an honor for me to actually be welcomed into Two-Spirit circle in that way, because I had never experienced that before. It's actually quite powerful. It was quite a powerful experience to sit. I'm going to get emotional, but to sit in circle and to see Two-Spirit elders in ceremony supporting our youth there, right? It was such a powerful experience for me, and then to just be turn around and just get welcomed into the movement and to represent, as best I can, sort of some of the experiences or needs or gaps in service for our West Coast Two-Spirit relatives was such a privilege and such an honor. In the same year, 2020, I also was asked to sit on the 2SLGBTQQIA sub-working group for the Federal National Action Plan, and did that work with my relative here, Percy, for about 1.5 years. I think we sat to develop the 2SLGBTQQIA report on in response to the 32 calls. That's it, thank you. The 32 calls for justice for Two-Spirit and Indiqueer relatives across the nation. And that was a really powerful experience to sit in circle with so many Two-Spirit and Indiqueer leaders, mentors, elders that are representing like across the nation, like different provinces, different experiences, different positionalities in terms of Two-Spirit folks that are have disabilities, Two-Spirit folks, that have experienced houselessness, Two-Spirit, folks that have experienced poverty, just violence, everything, right? It was just such an honor. I've learned so much so fast over the last few years. That same 2020 was a busy year. I was also asked by the United Nations LGBTQ core group to share some words about the experiences of Two-Spirit people here in Canada. That was through the Two-Spirits in Motion Society. So that was really awesome to sit on an international table as well and sort of hear not only what our relatives are doing here in Canada, but what our relatives are doing internationally, across the globe. Was very powerful. So yeah, I'm very humbled at how much I've learned and been exposed to within the Two-Spirit movement in a very short period of time. But I am also aware that this is something that I've been training for my whole life as a Two-Spirit person, and I do, and this is one of my responsibilities, as an Indigenous person, as a Two-Spirit community member. I believe that I'm always put where I'm always placed where I'm supposed to be. And I don't really have a lot of control over that myself. I can try and make plans for my education or my work or wherever I want to be, but the creator always puts me where I'm supposed to be. And so in terms of who's claiming me, I mean, I'm claimed by the families that I work with. I'm claimed by the communities that I have the honor to work with. And my responsibility has always been to be a helper. I mean, I said that I'm a trained Indigenous social worker, but I know that working within Indigenous communities, when I say social work, people will turn around and run. Us as Indigenous people, we have always had helpers. Quinitums call them social workers, right? But just those people that act as conduits, as middle people, as like mediators or whatever, just whatever ways, you know, I can apply what I know, who I know, or whatever to be of service to our families, to our relatives, and to our communities and nations, so that we can be well, so that our ways of knowing and being are centralized, and to support the resurgence of our cultural ways of knowing and being, then that's my role and responsibility. I really appreciate Sarah talking about language, right? Like in our Hunkaminam language, for example, in Musquem, there is no gender, right? There's no gender identified except for mom and dad, which is obvious. But that how we refer to everybody else that we come into contact with or that we're in circle with is in terms of our relationship with those people, right? What's our relationship? And that relationship actually dictates the responsibilities that we have to each other. So it's all about that interconnectivity, that shared responsibility that we have to support one another, to be, you know, in relation with each other in a good way, according to the ways of our ancestors, right? The protocols and ways of our ancestors. So the responsibilities are sort of, they're passed down to us culturally. And that's something that, I mean, as a helper, but also as a relative, as a community member, I take very, very seriously. And something that I hold to heart. So just kind of looking at these questions, like, why do we do this or introduce ourselves in this way? That's why. It's all about that we are encircled together. This is, you know, we're here as a collective. We're all related, all my relations, you know, we're all part of the same circle, and we have responsibilities to each other to lift one another up. And, you know, in my experience as a helper, to lift up the voice and the visibility of our Two-Spirit and Indiqueer relatives, because it's been silenced for so long. And, you know, my growing up as a young person, not being able to see myself reflected back, or feeling that I needed to fracture or split my identities off, is actually very harmful, right? Very painful. So this work, this Two-Spirit resurgence and cultural resurgence work in our families and in our communities is life-saving in that way, right? I mean, we know, I mean, our Indigenous Two-Spirit and Indiqueer youth have the highest rates of suicide. We know that, right? This is literally life-saving. This, you know, not something to be taken lightly. This work is extremely important, and it's all interconnected, even though we all come from different backgrounds and different cultures and cultural ways of knowing and being. We all have different ways that kind of describe to us what that work needs to look like and the protocols that we need to follow to get that work done. But it's really it's a calling, I think, to this work. It's not something that I chose. It's something that chose me to be doing this, and I'm really humbled, you know, to be able to sit in circles like this and to be part of this work in any ways that I can help. I will. So yeah, I forgot to take a sip of water or take a breath in that too. I think I've said enough. Yeah.
Okay. Cooks, I'll raise my hands up to you folks. So let's go. Let's do Two-Spirit. Percy, they, them, theirs, Mnimchiok, Stamia, why, Haskell, how, his squeeze, Percy Lezard. I'm very frazzled. I did that poorly. I have some Scalo Seal Sukanam Kane relative and kin in here. I am a firekeeper by my great grandparent Twee Annie Krieger. It's a role and responsibility that I was born into. It's not based on gender. My people, our language is not gendered, but I've also pushed my people to find words for me because lesbian, gay did not work. And I used to identify as dyke because water is sacred and I'd rather be associated with something that had nothing to do with the island of Lesbos or fig leaves or togas. I am a 60 scoop child. I was born 11 months too late to have gone through a residential school. My older sibling, who's 12 months older than me, was the last person in my family to have gone to residential schools. So I switched from the orange heart to the red heart. I also bring with me, I come from the Sinpinkton, which is the village between lakes or a place to live forever in the interior. I have a land that claims me, I have a people that claim me, and I have a language that I speak and roles and responsibilities within the 4 food chiefs. And it's the life givers and caregivers who give birth to children that named me in Chechen with the responsibilities of the wolf. And I am told that the wolf, much like a terrible comparison, that Atlas who holds the world, I'm the one that holds the 4 food chief in our governance system on my back and carries it forward. I sadly am in an academic industrial complex position because I love to teach. I wanted people to see me, see themselves reflected in front of the classrooms, someone to choose to be part of their committees, someone to support them as they want to do knowledge production. I'm complicit in that I'm a helper, formerly trained social worker. I am a researcher that did not come into OCAP principles until 2012. And I have been an educator that did performance rather than be a critical voice. I do not do the latter anymore. I now am a force in classrooms that's a critical voice and not about bringing my bundle. And not to say that those are not sacred items. I just do not bring it into the institution because it does not to me to see that type of Indian. I have had experiences that many of the panelists have talked about: houselessness, being involved with street culture, that's all I'm going to say about that. I don't feel I want to share any more than that. And I wanted to have this series because there was a gap. I got sick and tired of saying, well, what about me? And being in space and places that don't speak about my realities or experiences and my intersecting identities. I also wanted to push back and raise up, because I have a platform and an infrastructure, to say, we're here. We have a lot of knowledge production. We are academic. In fact, we don't need the institution needs us, because it has no original ideas and it hasn't been able to sustain itself without coming to extract us. And so I introduce myself that way. In the era of race shifting and pretend Indians, I want people to know that I'm claimed by an Indigenous people, land, and culture. And I am a registered member under the Colonial Indian Act of Penticton Indian Band in the era of race shifting. I want to raise up the voices of Indigenous people, literally for us, by us. So I'm going to get into the next question. If you could answer a question, and then I'll create space for another speaker. Corrina, if you could pick one, and then I'll ask another panelist to pick one of the other two. So if you have one monitor, I have the good fortune of having two. You spoke a little bit about your involvement of a resurgence. And this day specifically is for National Day of Awareness for MMIW. It has often, if not many times, left out the 2SLGBT. So if you can speak to either your involvement in MMIW, who is the missing in the missing? Or are the missing within the missing being addressed? And what is the role of C-sexism in this phenomenon?
Thank you. Yeah, I couldn't unmute myself. Yeah, so talking about my involvement with the 2SLGBTQQIA sub-working group, most of my work previous to that has been really locally based, local community oriented and urban circle based. So this is the first time that I got involved in a federal, provincial sort of ending gender-based violence work. So first off, I mean, I want to recognize, yeah, I mean, today is MMIWG Honoring and Awareness Day. Just want to point out the fact that I believe everything that I've checked, and I did some research at the beginning of this session. I haven't checked all of the sites, but all the government announcements of this day of leaving out 2S again in the MMIWG, which is problematic. I know you're already saying that 2S is always an afterthought. Just thinking about, I mean, even on the most recent Orange Shirt Day, acknowledging our residential school survivors. And I call it Orange Shirt Day because I don't call it Truth and Reconciliation Day, because I think reconciliation is with the Hunetums and colonial government is dead. But so Orange Shirt Day, just a reminder that again, like our two-spirit relatives and elders were also, attended these residential schools. These, well, they're not really schools, or like institutions of cultural genocide. Let's just say there weren't really anything about education or schools at all within these institutions, but just that the two-spirit experience still goes unnoticed, you know, in the acknowledgements that we're doing for residential school survivors as well. And there's no data on the experiences of two-spirit children and youth that attended these institutions. So over and over, we just see that two-spirit folk are missing, or just overlooked or omitted or erased in whether it's provincial, you know, legislation documents, federal documents, international documents. I'm thinking about like UNDRIP as well, an international UNDRIP. I mean, what that came out in, like, what the heck was it? 2007. I mean, it wasn't until 2013 that Canada even signed on to UNDRIP, which is extremely problematic. But again, like UNDRIP itself is actually still saturated in colonial binaries of men and women. You notice that in the language, that two-spirit and Indiqueer people are not specifically described as having distinct needs, and that having specific calls to action that tied to those needs. So the Truth and Reconciliation Report does the same thing. Doesn't kind of overlooks two-spirit and Indiqueer experiences. So again and again, whether it's colonial government, government institutions, or Indigenous leadership groups or whatever, or initiatives, just the fact that we continue to be an afterthought says to me, you know, like as a helper, as a two-spirit person, points to the need of our actual Indigenous leaders and our Indigenous, you know, mentors and folks that are within our communities and nations, their need to kind of decolonize and essentially queer their own community planning, sort of their own understanding of who is part of community, right? Because two-spirit people have always been part of community, and they need to get back to that. You know, two-spirit, we're saying, like traditions of gender and sexuality, fluidity, have always been part of our Indigenous cultures and our Indigenous languages. And so in order to sort of reclaim or have cultural resurgence, which I hear a lot of our Indigenous leaders say that that's, you know, a top priority, which it is, that resurgence must include two-spirit and Indiqueer people. It has to continue to like divide our community members and erase or omit. I think it was Monica that was saying that our nations are not whole without our two-spirit people, that we have always been part of the circle. And I've just seen, you know, that our Indigenous leadership continue to sort of mimic that sort of colonial binary, right? And just sort of focus in on the men, women, male, female, and not really being inclusive and respectful of just the diversity of experience, you know, of Indigenous gender and Indigenous sexuality within community planning and within these recommendations for calls to action. So what's missing? There's so much missing. I guess the other thing that I was going to say is just I've also seen that there's this practice of lumping genders that aren't men all together. right? So there's men as a gender, and then there's women and everything else, right? And so the everything else groups, which are typically women's groups, are supposed to also take on two-spirit distinctions, right? And take on understanding what two-spirit needs are and how we're going to meet those needs. But that doesn't work, right? Like you said, Percy, nothing for us or without us or by us. So that doesn't make any sense. And so even trying to work with these Indigenous women's groups, again, you sort of see the same thing where I think we really need to kind of get down to the nitty gritty and just be open and honest with each other that, you know, the decolonizing work, that reconciling work, decolonizing work looks different for each and every one of us, based on our experience and based on our positionality within the Indigenous circle or our relationship with Indigenous circles. So whether you're a settler, colonial settler, or whether you're an Indigenous self-identified man, woman, two-spirit person, we all, you know, have to engage unpacking the impacts of colonial violence and what that's meant for us, you know, in terms of our, not only our relationships with ourselves, but our relationships with each other. So I think that that's really important. I made a big list of what's missing. I don't know if you want me to go through it, Percy. The decolonizing requirements, I think, is the first thing that's missing for our Indigenous leadership circles. Having more meaningful engagement with two-spirit communities that are actually led by two-spirit people. So not sort of putting the onus on our Indigenous self-identified women to do that work, because that doesn't make any sense. I mean, as an adult person, I would not take on the responsibility to lead a two-spirit youth needs us, you know, group, you know, or tell them what they need, you know, or how to do it, because it needs to come from us as two-spirit Indigenous people. So I guess what I would say with the leadership is we need two-spirit leadership reflected within colonial government circles and also Indigenous governance circles. And by that, I mean like two-spirit council, for example, for the federal government, and also for some of the Indigenous leadership groups that are out there, the AFN, the BC AFN, a two-spirit council, if not two-spirit seats within these governing bodies that can help us plan more distinctly for two-spirit to meet two-spirit community needs, you know, within national, provincial, territorial, and local strategies. Yeah, I don't know. I think I'm just going to stop there. I don't want to, this is all about just the erasure and exclusion of two-spirit people, right? So what's missing is, you know, it's constantly an afterthought, you know, in all of these plans. And I don't want to come off like I'm complaining too much. There's a lot of, you know, good people that have put in a lot of good work, you know, to develop these strategies. And I think it's just, I think that there's a lot of fear out there to sort of take on decolonizing binary gender and binary views and experiences of sexuality. And I understand that, but the time is now. And to continue to render us invisible or erase us as two-spirit people is no longer, it's not acceptable anymore, right? That's enough. Knowing what we know now, it's not acceptable, and it's maintaining violence to continue to maintain the status quo. So I put that call to action and that accountability on our relatives as well, that the time has come, that they need to step up and walk into their own responsibilities according to our ancestors and our protocols in a good way. The time is now. I'll stop there.
Monica, I'm wondering if you could share some resilience on some amazing work and the ways in which you hold up our people. I just want to be in awe of you now. Just give you the.
Okay. Can you hear me? Okay. Okay. Wow. Okay. Very, yeah. Well, just to echo what Corrina was saying, you know, there's a lot of work to be done within the movement of missing and murdered women. I think, you know, we were overlooked when I think about the inquiry, you know, that there was no discussion around two-spirited trans women or two-spirited women or men within that whole context, you know, and that was very troubling for many of our community members to acknowledge the violence and the premature deaths that a lot of our community people are experiencing daily, you know. So that was something that really bothered me. But my involvement is to bring a voice. I think, like I said, when I'm doing Sisters and Spirits, is to, you know, is to really get out there and bring a face to people that are not actually in these circles or want to be in these circles, but are fear to be in these circles. You know, I feel, you know, even for myself, I get nervous being in these spaces because a lot of people don't want to hear the things that I have to say when it comes to the hardships that two-spirited people face due to colonization, due to systemic discrimination, due to the erasure of our history that has put two-spirited people in places of vulnerability and violence, right? So, but it's really important, like working with No More Silence, creating Smudge Don't Judge, as a two-spirited kind of educational video that really showcased the diversity of two-spirited people in our community and how, you know, we need to be supported, you know, and we're not this, you know, that, you know, we need to be respected, we need to be included, we need to have a voice in decision making, you know, when it comes to services or even when it comes to these movements. I think it's important, you know, that our voices are heard and validated, you know, regardless. And, you know, I always say regardless because I think, you know, we need to change this narrative of what people think of two-spirited people, which have colonizers have influenced our communities to think, you know, and it's hard. It's hard, you know, to really, you know, I was talking to an elder up in one of the reserves, one of my girlfriends from, and you know, with the Catholic Church, and I have nothing against people's religion, but it's really changed the ideas of how people really think about different people in our communities, especially two-spirited people. You know what I mean? Even though they know that we exist, it's just that colonization has really, you know, put this kind of internalized ideas that really hard for them to really accept. And we need to really start breaking down, you know what I mean? And teaching our younger, like our youth are so important for our future. You know what I mean? And they're starting to see the repeat violence, the internalized stigma and discrimination that as older two-spirited people have faced or still facing in our lives. You know, so, you know, Sisters in Spirit, I was speaking that night and I did a video called Remembering the Living, which you can find on YouTube. And it's, you know, just talking about, like I said earlier, about we all need to come together, you know, marginalizing one group or not acknowledging one group of women or two-spirited folk. What are we accomplishing as a whole, you know, of keeping all of us safe? You know, so that video really was, you know, something I think there was a lot of fear. I think because I was standing among our community members and telling them, being very open and raw about who I was as a two-spirited person and speaking on the voices that aren't here today. You know what I mean? Like I was saying, like our homeless population, people that use drugs, you know, people that do sex work, which are, you know, overlooked most times in our communities. We need to really start engaging and recognizing that, you know, we need to work with everyone in our community. You know what I mean? And, you know, and who it is the colonizers that have put these things into place that, oh, you have to be abstinent to access, or you have to be abstinent to be part of community, or you have to, you know what I mean? Or you can't be doing sex work and all these different things. You know what I mean? We have to recognize that we're all individuals. We all come from different experiences, life situations, you know what I mean? And we need to learn to, not learn, but we need to recognize, you know what I mean? We know as Indigenous people that we're stigmatized around finding housing and employment, and the financial, financially, most Indigenous people, not all, but some live in poverty. You know what I mean? They leave their communities to come to urban centers like Toronto to think that they're going to get jobs and they're going to be successful, to find out that discrimination is even higher. And on top, if you're a two-spirited or trans, that is very visible, the outcome to that is homelessness, or you know what I mean. So or sex work. So we have to really, I think, through the missing and murdered movement, you know what I mean, things are slowly changing, and we're start recognizing, different groups of women or two-spirited folks in our communities, and the importance to include them in these conversations, to include them, to bring awareness and visibility so we can protect all people in our community. Who is missing, like Corrina said? You know what I mean? Trans women, two-spirited trans women, two-spirited men, two-spirited women, people in the sex industry, people that are homeless, people that use drugs. These are people that are always overlooked or don't want to be, you know what I mean? Or we don't talk about, and it just furthers the stigma and the violence, not only within society or in the systems that we access, but even within the people in our communities and the services we access in those communities, right? So I think it's, I think we really have to, really listen to people in our communities. And, when I started doing sex work, it wasn't something, oh, I'm going to be a sex worker. That was not my, I didn't want to be a sex worker. It wasn't something I woke up one day, I was going to be a sex worker. But it was something I had to do at one time to survive. It was something I had to do to have a roof over my head, or you know what I mean? And those circumstances are different for every individual in our community. But you know what I mean? We should not be judging people for what they do in their lives, but better supporting them and giving them resources and and education and how they can, if they need to access services or housing or employment or education, that those things are there. I think, they're missing with the missing address. Okay, I'm just reading the question too. Are they missing with the missing being addressed in one of all of this? Well, and I think, like I said before, and I think Corrina kind of said it on the head, two-spirited people are just not part of those conversations. You know what I mean? And we need to really, make space and demand it, and demand our voices to be heard. Like I said earlier, our circle isn't complete without two-spirited people. We can't allow, we have the power to make change. Yes, we are colonized individuals, but we can change those ideas and those narratives. We can include people and make our circle complete. So, I think we need more folks in our community to do their work in any different way they can. And I'm not saying people should be out about who they are, because I know that's hard for some people. But there are so many different ways that we can advocate in our communities without being visible, through social media, through, collectives, bringing a voice on places like this, where, with all our participants, not just a hashtag. Sometimes a lot of people just do hashtag this, that, but what are you really doing to make change? So, I think we really have to find it in ourselves, even with our allies, is to really work, what are you doing to bring more inclusive discussion with two-spirit folks within this movement of missing and murdered Indigenous women and trans folks and women and men and so forth, and two-spirit folks? Thanks.
Brielle, I wonder if you could share resurgence. I know you started us off in a good way with the smudge. Can you share some of the brilliance of the work that you do on the prairies?
My work?
Brielle.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, that's okay.
I just first want to say Monica for Prime Minister. I think let's start there. In my young life, I want to see a two-spirit trans person and leadership position. I hope that I'll see that one day. But I think it's an important thing to go off of what my fellow panelists were saying. like the inclusion, the discussions, the social movements. I think we need to aim for more like social transformations within our interpersonal relationships with the cisgender hetero population. And I think for me, the reason why I say that is like, well, it's not our two-spirit trans people killing each other, first of all. It's not, you know, even when there are internalized transphobia and cisgender sexism, we have to be so critical when working with these populations, especially under the lens of MMIWG2S, because we've had to fight for our space to be able to advocate for our kin, you know. And even in death, a lot of our transgender kin get misgendered, you know, which is another form of violence. It's just like a stick in the eye, maybe we'll put it that way. I'm thinking, you know, like as I move forward, as I get older in life, I'm 27 years old, very existential 27-year-old because of the way the world is going right now. You know, we're currently in pandemic. We're currently, you know, we're seeing a lot of suicide in our Indigenous communities. I felt like my role here in Manitoba, because I've lived in Manitoba for most of my life. I moved from northern Manitoba to southern Manitoba, and a part of my role as a young person is to figure out how I continue the fight for sovereignty, the fight for humanity, and the fight for like two-spirit resurgence within our First Nations context. It's kind of like, it's like watching myself transform. Like I'm kind of like a shapeshifter with all these issues, because there's always been a gaps in so many social political issues that affect our community that most of us have had to adapt to be able to understand like what it is that we need for ourselves. Like, and then it's only by having circles like this that we can figure it out, what our two-spirit people, our gender diverse peoples need. And I think firstly, you know, especially in the age of pretendians and the age of race shifters, we do gotta be
Race shifters.
Yeah, they're race shifters.
Sorry.
You know what? I often think about, like, one of the things that makes me most angry are people who claim Indigenous identity without, like, you know, claiming a community without, like, you know, what's your background like? And I don't know why we're allowing fragility over this, because it's just how we've always interacted. Like if I was back home, the first thing people would say, "Oh, Nucky Mama, who's your mom?" So first thing people ever want to know. Second to, do you have a cigarette? But like in my community, we always ask, like, who's your mom? Who's your dad? And it's always the mother. It's always the mother that's like the social one. Everybody wants to know the mother. That's the that's the kind of background that I come from. And I've always thought about, like, you know, like where are my trans and two-spirit people in our everyday interactions? Like, you know, I want to hear that my relatives back home, my cisgender relatives, are asking about my well-being, asking my mother, my family, how's your daughter doing? How's your two-spirit daughter doing? Is there anything that we can do without having for me to be like an inconvenience, because I'm an inconvenient Indian. And I've always been taught, like, you know what, you're gonna have to go against the grain, by being abrasive, by being critical. And I've always walked through life with a critical lens, and I've always rode the waves of, you know, other social trends. You know, we had our I Don't Know More movement in 2012, and as a young Indigenous person, I was just turning 18 that year, and I allowed that to, you know, shift my thoughts and perspective on what it meant to be a Canadian, because I grew up in Indian country. Firstly, I was born an Indian, and then somewhere I became an Aboriginal, and then one day I woke up Indigenous, you know. And at some point I thought, like, where does my personal autonomy come from? Where does my sense of being come from? And like, I think for a lot of us two-spirit people, it's navigating imposter syndrome daily, you know, the battle with identity, and how do we shift those thoughts into good thoughts that help us ask questions like, who am I? Where do I come from? What is my purpose? What is my role? And those questions are hard questions to ask of oneself if you've been removed from your context for such a long time, I'm starting to think about the ways that I speak about my indigeneity in relation to the land, to creator, to the people I live amongst. I think the way that I've included myself in conversations, like I've had to literally like put myself in situations where like I had to show up with a megaphone because the speakers or organizers didn't include like a trans or two-spirit perspective. And then you know what, like there's that's not even the half of it. You know, within our two-spirit organizing circles, I sat on a two-spirit speaker series, and I asked the last time I was on a panel, I asked, where are my Afro-Indigenous siblings, because we're often leaving our Afro-Indigenous relatives out of the conversation of indigeneity and two-spirit. So I'm really happy to have like one of my fellow sisters here now, but I feel like there's still more work to do. You know, inclusion is one thing, but what about social services? What about housing? What about financial reparations to our relatives? I think we need to start thinking about bringing these things into actuality. And I think part of the two-spirit process that I see myself as like as a person who wants to conjure these things for our community. Let's actualize this reality, this new reality where our relatives no longer are suffering under a social hierarchy that doesn't value them or doesn't see them as human. And I really feel like we can't wait for our First Nations leaders. We can't wait for our cisgender brothers and sisters on the front lines to include us. We are gonna have to push ourselves into those spaces. And for me, as a grassroots warrior and woman, I look to empower my grassroots relatives. I look to put the power back into the hands of the people. And I use our natural protocols to do that, because we're not built to be machines. You know, this great white world, this great Western world pushes you and it shapes you and molds you to be something that we're not. And as two-spirit and trans diverse people, we know that. We've felt that our whole lives, being something that we're not, being forced to play roles that we didn't want to play in our community, in our everyday lives. We let other people tell us what we should be doing, when though that should be coming from us. And I think that in this day and age, 2021, we deserve to have our autonomies respected, our personal power respected. And I really feel like no more waiting for the invite. I think we've earned the right to say, where is my invitation? Where is my voice at the table? Where is my brothers and sisters? Where is my kin? Where are my non-binary kin? You know, it's the time and the age to demand, the betterment for our people. Our people, we need to turn years of surviving into thriving. And the only way to do that is for us to take measures and actions into our own hands, to put power back into our transgender, non-binary, and two-spirit kin. And to do that, we have to know where we come from, and we have to tell ourselves that, yes, this knowledge, it is my right to hold traditional knowledge. It is my right to know my people's creation stories about where we come from, to know our relationships with the cosmos, with the universe, because our peoples are scientific, we are metaphysical, and we've always been reduced to, I feel like I'm talking into my feather. I look like I'm not talking into it. And that's very Cree, to be really silly and to be very laughing. So like, that's also a birthright for me, is the silliness that I possess within this vessel. And I feel like it's a part of protocol, is being silly sometimes, because it teaches you humility. But really, I really feel like my role today, what I'm doing now, is using my militantness to push forth the transgender agenda, to push forth the two-spirit agenda. Saying, I want to make a sweat lodge out of the table that we're sitting at, instead of sitting at the table. Why can't we make firewood and come together and have tea and just be with one another? There's different ways of doing things, and I really feel like this is the day and age where we're going to see a lot of tricksters come forth and just make all sorts of social transformations. In my Cree way of life, the very first human was Kwagiulth, and as we were to learn about Kwagiulth. It wasn't until later one of my mentors, Dr. Alex Wilson, told me Kwagiulth was a two-spirit being. And I received a story about how Kwagiulth changed himself into a woman, and I just lived after that. And I just thought about like, wow, this beautiful way of life was paved for me by a ancient relative who shape-shifted and changed all the animals and the land around me, and just thought about myself and, you know, how my relatives and I are capable of these transformations, because my people believed in the power to change things and transform, like metaphysically and physically. And I really feel like within our community and like within this body of mine, I feel like I have the power to change like the world around me when I'm with my siblings, when I'm with two-spirit kin, whenever I'm with transgender siblings. I feel like there's this profound power that that's just lit inside of me whenever when I'm in those circles. And I really feel like that's my goal, is to bring people into those circles, to bring these young ones into these circles, to bring our forgotten relatives. I provide a lot of harm reduction based ceremonies. So here in Winnipeg, I have a full moon lodge that I run with my sisters Raven and Ivana, and we invite gender diverse people. We also invite people who, you know, might still be using, might not be sober, to come in and pray with us, because we don't turn away anybody. And I feel like for me, that lodge is my next responsibility, and that's where I'm going to be focusing all my energy and attention to, is to be a good relative to these up and coming two spirits and trans relatives, so that they are prepared for, you know, the years to come. That's all I have to say for now. So I'll hand it off back to you, Percy.
Sarah, I welcome you to.
Gila Tesla, wow, I don't know if there's anything left to say. I feel like there's so much just beauty and wisdom that has been shared already. So thank you to all of you for everything you've shared. I guess I'm thinking so much, just listening to all of you, just been reflecting on, you know, for me, what's missing is normalizing like our worlds, you know, this space, these conversations, the words we use, the stories we tell, the bodies we inhabit, and the relations we have, you know, that I was just thinking about, you know, all the transformation stories and figures and teachings are at the heart of the culture that I'm a part of Kwakwaka'wakw culture. You know, is rich with transformation, moving between bodies, moving between worlds. That is like, all the stories are about that. And yet, because of colonization, we have this imposed binary system that has been mandated through our chief and council system, how power operates in our homes, in our big houses, you know, the social structures now that are taking up issues of violence, of addressing kind of our everyday lives, are now infused with these with you know, heteronormative, cisnormative kind of relations. And there's this real friction there, and that we're trying to bring these like beautiful, diverse worlds full of transformation, where transformation and gender fluidity and gender diversity is, you know, normalized, is just taken for granted as part of what shapes our worldviews and our relationships with our lands and how we govern ourselves. You know, and then we're trying to make our, you know, our relatives who experience violence matter within a system that is based on a binary. So, you know, there's this violent clash all the time, I feel. So really figuring out how to normalize the beautiful, diverse relations that we have in our communities, and to make all of our relatives matter. I feel like, you know, for me, seeing how over the years, as issues of murdered and missing Indigenous gender diverse relations has come to be taken up publicly, has come to matter, kind of where there's now like a funding stream and a government program and a report, and kind of this recognition that the gap between our lived everyday realities and how MMIW is represented, that gap has just grown. So, you know, on the ground, doing grassroots work around this issue, that, you know, in lots of diverse contexts, gender diversity was a part of that. It wasn't necessarily just about hetero cis women. That, you know, one of the women who was on the list of women from the downtown east side was a trans woman. And then as that issue became taken up at Tabor's with more and more power and more resources and more of a platform, that got erased. And so I think that continues to happen, that, you know, as we've seen these sort of formal avenues be created, that the story about this issue has become like a singular narrative. And, you know, I do think that sexism plays a role there in that, you know, because Indigenous women's lives also fail to matter, you know, there's been this taking up, but this rhetoric of mattering because women are sisters or mothers or aunties. But what if we're not sisters or mothers or aunties? What if we're non-binary? Or what if we, you know, have a beautiful, diverse way of you know, describing who we are? So instead of accounting for that beautiful diversity, the language has, in fact, you know, that visibility is actually based on this real idea of mattering because you're a particular kind of woman. And I think that's really, in fact, re-entrenched, you know, the fact that we have to be particular kinds of Indigenous people in order to come to matter. And it has, in fact, widened the gap instead of making you know, space for the language that reflects our actual lives, which is not based in a binary, so, and not based in heteronormative realities. You know, I think for me, when I was you know, coming to voice my my sexuality and kind of who I am in the world, looking around the big house and those spaces of ceremony, there's so many queers in my community. The big house is full of you know, I have a lot of queer relatives, and we'd all be in a certain corner at the back of the big house at ceremony and at potlatches and feasts. And there's not a lot of words. You know, I think that there's it's different for rural and reserved communities where, you know, there isn't necessarily the formal organizations, or the word two-spirit is often not used, but we have our own forms of community making. And so I think that just having the ability for at those places where the issue of murdered and missing Indigenous relatives is where decisions are being made about funding, where programs are being designed, where reports are being written. I'm so happy to hear that you, two of you led that, you know, the report, that important report that was written. But all of those tables should reflect, you know, our lived realities instead of being an add-on or saying, hey, we weren't included in the inquiry, so can we have our own thing? That should never have happened. And, you know, to me, this is not just about, you know, this is about heterosexist kind of norms, but as so many people have already mentioned, I think it's also about respectability politics, and that, you know, we don't want to include the voices of the people whose lives we're actually talking about at the decision-making tables and at those tables where this issue gets represented. And I think that's only gotten worse as there's been greater and greater resources, power, as it's become kind of brought into more like government structures and that kind of thing. And so to me, I think that the grassroots everyday realities of, you know, supporting our loved ones, sitting with families who have had someone who has died, you know, doing anti-violence work, being there for each other, showing up for each other, you know, that work has never changed because the resources have not flowed in that direction. And so I think, you know, I would just ask, for me, I really think that if we want to address what's missing from the missing, as you're asking, is that we can, and I really love this, you know, for us, by us, that we've already been doing that all along. And so people can, I really hope that people will, this is one, you know, day when people can come together to talk about this important issue and remember our loved ones who've been lost. But I always want to ask, like, what are people doing tomorrow? And I hope what they're doing tomorrow is, you know, thinking about someone doing this work and asking what they can do to support them, because those formal tables are not doing it. They're not creating that space. And I love what Brielle said, you know, we're not waiting for an invitation to the table anymore. You know, we create our own table, or I love, we create a fire from the table, burn the table. So thank you for that inspiration. I think I'll stop there. So Gila Casta.
So we're not going to get to questions. I've been answering them live. If you can go to Q&A, folks, and quickly look at those documents and links that I sent for those who are still with us. We've had responses. Again, I want to be accountable and transparent and share the documents. You can see them. They're able to be searched online. Supports for you if this is something that has reminded you or moved in you, your own lived experiences that needs a little tender care and support. And if you have not heard these words today, in light of being a family member or someone who has also experienced violence, from the bottom of my heart, I see you, I value you, and I love you. And you are here, and you are a gift and a bundle, my Indiqueer, gender diverse relatives and kin in attendance, from the very far east to the north to the prairies and even the South Pacific. I see you, folks. Closing, like, I don't even know, like, I have nothing that I can add to the conversation. Absolutely nothing that I can add to the conversation that has not been shared in its brilliance. Nothing, but I just ask that, again, another day, confirming one of the speakers, but if you can, November 18th, because I do not want to compete with white settlers and the ways in which Trans Day of Remembrance is identified. Please join me, Raven Davis, Charlotte Nolan, Kai, Jack potentially, and Smokey for Indigenizing Trans Day of Remembrance. Once I confirm our final speaker, I'll put that out on socials. Again, thank you very much, folks. I'm just in awe. I got the fan day and spend time with my relatives and kin who continue to raise me up and help sustain me. And if folks leave, if there's, can you share how you care for yourselves to continue to do this work, what sustains you and feeds you with joy? Because we're not just our trauma, we're actually beauty and joy. So I'll invite Brielle, and then Monica, and then Corrina, and then Sarah.
Yeah, Dante. Thank you, Percy. This was such beautiful medicine for my heart. Let's see, how do I do self-care? Well, be gentle with yourself. Take a bubble bath. Boil some cedar water and add it to your bath. Pray the medicines hold you gently like the ancestors would. Remember that inner child inside of you and feed that. For me, it's cartoons and hanging out with my best friend, laughing. Make yourself laugh. Honestly, for me, laughter is like my favorite method of releasing, you know, when I can't cry. I'm like, well, I'm just gonna laugh it out. I hope people will challenge cis heteros in their life to take action, to own their transphobia, to unpack their transphobia, as well as their proximity to transphobia, because it is like the number one responsibility of like why we're dying as trans people and gender diverse people. I think that it's a time for, I think the way I self-care myself is by calling out other people's transphobia. So if that's something that sounds like it's for you, you should do it too. But with that, I'll leave you with love you all. Thank you, Percy. Thank you to my fellow panelists.
Hi, everyone. Whilst, you know, through COVID, it's been I think for a lot of us, it's been really hard. And it's been really hard to stay connected to community. I'm so grateful that I'm part of a two-spirited drumming group called the Two-Spirited two-spirited cedar circle. Two-spirited circle of cedar drummers, which we meet every week on Tuesdays in the gay community at the 519, and we drum for a couple hours. That allows us to stay connected. It's very self-care. When I hear the drum, it just takes everything away. Like, I work in a few different agencies, so plus my own nonprofit. So, you know, I have 2 dogs and a cat that I cherish. They're my companions, and they keep me going, and, you know, and stay connected to, you know, the greenery in Toronto. You know what I mean? There's a lot of spaces where we can just get away from the big bubble and just kind of sit in nature and just absorb things and kind of reflect on, you know what I mean, getting back to normal again. So yes, I want to thank everyone for having me here today, Miigwech, and yes, see you soon.
Thank you, everybody. I'm pretty overwhelmed as well. I'm going to be taking in everything that was shared here today for a really long time and carrying it within my heart and within my spirit for a really long time. And I'm grateful to each and every one of you for your generosity and what you've shared here. Taking care of self, that can always be difficult. You know, when you're doing community work and advocacy and that, it's sometimes difficult to remember yourself. Right. And I remember a teaching that an elder gave me when I was over on the island that was like, you're only as good to other people as you are to yourself, and that you can't pour from an empty cup. Right. And then you need to be mindful that if you are pouring from an empty cup, what are you pouring into the families and communities that you're working with, and to be really mindful of that responsibility, that ourselves, taking care of ourselves is really important. One of the things that I used to do was just sort of considering like the 4 elements of self, right? Mental, physical, spiritual, emotional. And I'd even do a little doodle sometimes and make sure that at least once a month, you know, I kind of make that there's something in each component that I am actually doing. And then it's easier for me, because I'm a visual person, to sort of see some of the areas within myself that are out of balance. Might not be taking care of my spiritual self as much as I'm taking care of my physical self, and so on and so forth. So that's something that I do. Being on the land, whenever I need to take care of myself, I'll run to the bush pretty quickly. I need to be around fire. Fire is really healing for me. And the land is a really calming, peaceful, and a source of recharge for me. So being out in the green, being next to fire. Other than that, I would say being involved in community. I know the pandemic has been so weird. Community has become a virtual community for the most part, and it's just starting to open up again now, which I'm really grateful for. But, you know, finding ways to connect with community and to listen to the words of your kin in this way, in any space that you can, is something that I think has carried me through this really rough, you know, year and a half, where I felt so disconnected from community. I don't think I would have survived if we didn't have these virtual spaces like this, and our Two-Spirit communities still continuing to find ways to gather together, to laugh, to celebrate one another, right, to cry with one another, and to just continue to sit in circle and keep the work going. So being in community is a source of healing for me, for sure. The other thing that I find really rejuvenating is watching our Two-Spirit and Indiqueer youth and all their movement and everything that they're doing. All the amazing, transformative, creative work that they're doing is so awe-inspiring. I'm so in awe of our youth, so proud. You know, I can leave this earth knowing that our youth have it, you know, that they're standing up and doing the work that needs to be done, and they're going to be changing things for all of us. And I'm so grateful to be able to witness their work in whatever ways that I can. Our young people are medicine, our children are medicine. So finding ways to be around them and to witness and support them, you know, as an older person as well, is something that I do to recharge my soul, so to speak. But yeah, again, thank you, everybody.
Kwagiulth. Well, this has been self-care. I feel very held in this space. So thank you all. I really miss the opportunity to gather together. So yeah, this has been really beautiful. I think for me, I really think about, I have thought so much in the last few years, especially about, you know, where often we're distanced from our communities because of violence or transphobia, homophobia. And it's not always safe to be, you know, in our territories. There's a lot of, you know, we talk about doing land-based work or that kind of knowledge, but what happens when we can't actually be in those spaces? And so, you know, for me, I really think about the place where my name has meaning, and those being in those lands and waters, that even when I can't physically be there, that you know, I'm still tethered to that place. I still can orient myself there. And one of the ways that I do that is by paying attention to my dreams. I think that's a really important part of nurturing my spirit. I was actually just reading something about our laws, and there was a quote about, you know, having governance over our dreams, not just the knowledge from our stories, our dances, but our dreams are in there too. And that was just really validating for me about that. I also play a lot of like sounds of ocean, like just really, really, really loud in my headphones when I want to be kind of surrounded, if I can't go to the water, to be surrounded by the sound of waves. And also there's a lot of videos online of our songs and dances and stuff. So I often just have that running in the background when I'm feeling depleted. Again, when I can't be home for whatever reason, or, you know, haven't been able to be in those spaces, that I can still find ways to surround myself, like immerse myself in that. And for me, the sense of smell is such a powerful way to, if we're experiencing trauma or having, all that we carry. I think especially those of us that do work around violence, it's not just the trauma we've experienced and intergenerational trauma, but all the stories we carry and with us. And so I have like scents all over the place. I have them in my bag. I have them around me. I have cedar smells. I'm holding a piece of cedar right now that I can smell. And so just to find those things that are comforting for you, I'm constantly like spritzing things, and really that really for me is a nurturing way to instantly kind of bring myself into the present, and to remind myself that I kind of have my own back, I guess, with that. So yeah, I just encourage everyone to find what works for them and have those things that you can know that even, especially when we're having these conversations and doing the important work of honoring the relatives that we've lost, and honoring each other and the experiences that we've had that are violent and continue to be violent, that we always have those tools, as Percy has said, in our basket that we can pull out whenever we need them. So thank you for ending in this way.
Cooks, enjoy the rest of your day. For those on the West Coast and those on the prairies, enjoy the welcoming in the evening. And for us here in the Dish with One Spoon and those relatives and kin, either starting the day in the South Pacific or various places across Turtle Island or the South Pacific, enjoy the rest of this moment. And I hope to see folks next month for Indigenized Trans Day of Remembrance. Take care, folks. And for those who can, log off. White, cooks, bamape, until next time.